Hello and welcome everyone. I am Tigray, and today I would like to briefly reflect on a tweet sent out by Yemane Gebrameskel, the spokesperson of Eritrea, the Minister of Information or Minister of Disinformation, some of you might call him, and it is a tweet that he sent out in response to another tweet by the State Department of the United States through its African Affairs Office. And the original tweet from the State Department simply relays a message by Obasanjo that no foreign force should be, the presence of foreign forces should not be acceptable to any country. He said that in Mekelle. Some of you remember that Obasanjo was in Mekelle a couple of days ago, and apparently to kind of mollify the Tigrayans, he said that the presence of foreign forces, apparently in reference to Eritrea, of course, he said that no country should accept the presence of foreign forces. But of course, he couldn't mention Eritrea by name because we know that no one could pluck up the courage to mention Eritrea by name, partly because Eritrea has Ethiopia by its balls. Really, that's the reason why no one could dare mention Eritrea by name. But anyways, when they say foreign forces or non-ENDF forces, mostly they are referring to Eritrea indirectly in a way that wouldn't offend Eritrea and bring Ethiopia lots of trouble. And so Yemane took exception to that. He took exception to Obasanjo saying that no country should accept the presence of foreign forces, and he took even stronger exception to the State Department saying that, well, emphasizing that point. And he seems to be making a very, very interesting argument, Yemane, a very honest and a very blunt argument. And I think we have to actually give him credit for being very upfront and honest in terms of why Eritrea believes that it had the right to stay in Tigray and in Ethiopia. And the argument he's making is that there is a defense agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea. He calls it, wait, let me read out the tweet in its entirety for clarity. So Yemane says, the US State Department has apparently elevated hypocrisy to a new and assailable level. This is Orwellian speak. I don't understand why it's Orwellian speak, but anyways, he wanted to use fancy term, so let's give him a pass. This is an Orwellian speak and lopsided interpretation of international law. Defense architectures between sovereign African states is not subject to prior endorsement or veto by extraneous powers. So he's making the case that there is a defense architecture agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and that no matter what the agreement signed in Nairobi or in South Africa might stipulate, regardless of what the US might demand that Eritrea does, regardless of what kind of bilateral agreements Ethiopia might enter into, he is saying that Ethiopia and Eritrea have an agreement, presumably for Eritrea to help Ethiopia in defense matters, and that includes, of course, for Eritrea to have a presence in Tigray. So that is the argument he's making. And it's an interesting argument, not least because this is not the line that is adopted by Ethiopia. If you remember, Ethiopia, starting from as far back as Abiy admitted the presence of Eritrea, the line that Ethiopia has been pushing is that Eritrea entered Tigray on its own volition because it was provoked by the Tigrayans. And Ethiopia hasn't been in a position to defend Tigray or Ethiopia from Eritrean troops, because Tigrayans have depleted the Ethiopian force by attacking the federal base in Tigray. So that is the argument that has been being advanced by Ethiopia, that Eritrea entered Tigray because Ethiopia wasn't in a position to defend Tigrayan borders, and for that the Tigrayans are to blame, because they attacked the Ethiopian federal base in Mekelle that would have defended Tigray. So from Ethiopia's side, the argument is that there is no defense deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and the reason Eritrea is in Tigray is because Ethiopia couldn't push it out. It doesn't have the capability now to defend against the terrorist TPLF and against Eritrea at the same time. So that is the argument from Ethiopia's side. Whereas Yemane is telling us that's completely not true. There actually is a deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea, a defense architecture deal that allows Eritrea to continue to have a presence in Tigray. So completely diametrically opposed arguments being advanced by Ethiopia and by Eritrea. And the argument from Yemane, from Eritrea, makes perfect sense. You have to accept that if there is an agreement, if there is a deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and if Ethiopia has invited Eritrea to have a presence in Tigray, then we might disagree with the way Eritrean troops have behaved themselves, with the atrocious crimes that they have perpetrated, with the devastation that they have caused in Tigray, with the heinous crimes that they have unleashed against Tigrayan civilians, women and children, with looting, with the general plunder and all that. We could take huge offense at what Eritrean troops have done in Tigray, but we can't really complain that Eritrean troops are operating in Tigray, because they have an agreement with Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has invited them to have a presence in Tigray. So from Eritrea's point of view, they have a perfectly legitimate reason to continue to operate in Tigray, right? So I don't really have any problem with what Yemane is saying. My only problem would be that why had Eritrea not made this position official before? Why did it wait for 2 years to tell us that it has a defense agreement in Ethiopia that allows it to continue operating in Tigray? And of course, the other really bizarre point is, what was the assumption when the United States, represented by Mike Hammer, and the European Union, well, actually the European Union wasn't invited to the peace talks in South Africa, but the African Union, what was the assumption when they said that foreign forces must leave Tigray? Were they aware that Ethiopia and Eritrea have an agreement that allows Eritrea, as Yemane is telling us, to continue to operate in Tigray? And if they were aware of that, were they expecting Eritrea to not honor the deal? Because if Ethiopia and Eritrea have a deal for them to operate jointly, for Eritrea to continue to operate in Tigray, if they have a deal, if they have a defense agreement between the two, then it wouldn't make sense for America to say Eritrea must leave now, because Eritrea is a sovereign country and Ethiopia is a sovereign country, and Ethiopia has invited Eritrea to do whatever it wants to do in Tigray. Now, I am not by any means implying that I accept the presence of Eritrea in Tigray. That's a separate point. What I am saying is that if Ethiopia has invited Eritrea to operate in Tigray, from Eritrea's point of view, the agreement for them to leave Western Tigray or for them to leave Eastern Tigray doesn't make sense, because they have an agreement with Ethiopia. And I could understand why they wouldn't want to be told by the Americans to leave when they have an agreement that binds them to remaining in Tigray. So this is an interesting point. It's an interesting point that Eritrea should mention this at this point. And actually, I do have, I could kind of see why the Eritrea felt the need to make this explicit, because they are in a way putting forward an argument for why they can't be told to leave Western Tigray. They are simply saying we have an agreement with the country, and that agreement overrides any other third-party imposed deals between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. So that's one thing. But for the Ethiopian government, this is a tricky point now, because if Ethiopia was to accept that that it has a deal with Eritrea, then it would have to take responsibility for all the unspeakable crimes perpetrated by Eritreans, starting from the Aksum massacre. I think today is 2 years since that ghastly massacre was committed by Eritreans, so 2 years anniversary today. And Ethiopia will have to take responsibility for that. Ethiopia will have to take responsibility for everything, and there is thousands of unspeakable things that Eritrean troops have done in Tigray. And if they have done what they have done, the Eritreans, with the knowledge of Ethiopia, with the permission from Ethiopia, with the license from Ethiopia, then Ethiopia would be responsible for that. And that is a very tricky point for Ethiopia now. And the second point is Ethiopia has rejected, at least until today, that it has invited Eritrea. The argument, the line advanced by Ethiopia, and I mentioned that earlier, is that the reason to the extent that Eritrea is operating in Tigray is because Ethiopia wasn't able to defend against Eritrea. That is what they have said. And you will have heard them say that. The way they frame it is as follows. They say that when the Tigrayan forces attacked the federal base in Mekelle, the defense force of Ethiopia was completely depleted, was completely decapitated, so that it wasn't able to provide any sort of protection. And on top of that, the Tigrayans themselves provoked Eritrea by launching rockets and all that, and that meant that Eritrea couldn't be prevented from coming into Tigray. That's what they have been saying, and that seems to be the assumption that the people who made them sign the agreement have made. But now Eritrea is saying that that's actually false. So my question now is, what is the State Department going to do now? Are they going to force Ethiopia to walk out of that deal with Eritrea? Or are they going to call out Eritrea for lying? And are they going to impose sanctions? Because that is the only thing that they could do now. Because Eritrea has now come out and told them that the Americans, don't have the right to demand that it leaves Tigray. So now it's for the US and for the other parties who are supposed to help the Tigrayans and the Ethiopian forces implement the deal, to call out and to act on this. But I think this is a significant admission, a significant pronouncement on the part of Eritrea to say that they have a deal with Ethiopia to remain in Tigray. Now, either Ethiopia has to make a move or the US has to make a move, because as far as Eritrea is concerned, they have put forward the reason for why they can't and they shouldn't be expected to leave Western Tigray. So I I thought is worth reflecting upon, because for me it's a very, very important admission. Not so much because I didn't know that there was a deal between Eritrea and Ethiopia. I think everybody knows that Ethiopia and Eritrea, agreed. They formed some sort of war pact, and it happened sometime around 2018, and it had been in the works for 2 years before Abiy decided to invade Tigray. And any sensible observer of how things have been playing out in Ethiopia and Eritrea knows that the two countries have a pact. But what is surprising to me is that Eritrea would now come out and openly say that that is the case, when Ethiopia is trying to advance a completely different point. And I think this puts the US and the other parties to, not to the agreement, but the other parties who are supposed to act as guarantors of the implementation, in a bit of a difficult position, because they have to take this into account now, and we will see how things play out. But I think this is a very important admission on the part of Eritrea, as far as I'm concerned. So that was my 2 cents for today. And thanks for the listen, and have a good time. Bye bye.